Hello, number Samatash Dile. Welcome back to Lardin 77 channel. Number Samatash Dile Tharin European Union Naulolia and Pudun Kola Leme Mamchi Nandura. And the Yabadu Chixida, Ampemisi Yabudu, Ani Penalia, Dromi Tobda Mewada Chudu, Rame Mewache, and Dana Shingita. Tungin nazo shipyunal chedera adindeganlia lengme yabu shushti na sha andana shinkran sugi resolution jiksha na do ti yabu chinse ro chamcham le tindi jiksin bai na yabu do pede golia atu china shwe.
It's a warning that authoritarian regimes will stop at nothing to silence voices of faith, culture and integrity. We must call this what it is. Repression that crosses the borders, repression that violates not only human rights but human dignity. The Chinese Communist Party seeks not just to govern, it seeks to erase the soul of the people, their traditions, their leaders. Europe must not look away. We call for an international investigation. We demand accountability and we stand in unwavering solidarity with Tibetan people. If Europe truly stands for human rights, then we must not allow economic interests to justify our silence. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Heide, please.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. When it comes to discussing the systematic violations of freedom of religion in Tibet, then we have to touch upon not just religious and cultural freedom, identity, human rights, but above all, about the fact that the European Union needs to pay much closer attention to the situation in Tibet. One particular tragedy is the death of Tulku Hunkar Dorje behind bars. These circumstances need to be independently and internationally investigated. The fate of the 11th Panchen Lama is also unclear. He was abducted at the age of 6, and his fate is still unknown. And this is particularly relevant when we look forward to the election of the 14th Dalai Lama. It is not the business of the Chinese government to meddle in the question of succession. It's necessary to clearly separate state and religion, the oppression and suppression of religious practices, the destruction of Tibetan culture, political persecution, forced detention. All these must come to an end. The People's Republic of China must recognize the Tibetan people and their rights.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaminsky, please.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie
President, Commissioner, what we are witnessing today in Tibet is not only repression against religion, but the systematic destruction of freedom and an attempt to deprive Tibetans of their feeling of national identity. Monasteries are under permanent surveillance, monks and nuns are detained, re-educated, and deprived of their right to exercise their faith. The Communist Party is trying to replace real spiritualism by ideological allegiance. In our resolution, we call for an investigation of the circumstances of the arrest and death of one of the Tibetan religious leaders. This is a clear violation of fundamental human rights by the Chinese authorities, and it requires a clear, decisive reaction. The investigation of all suspicious deaths of Tibetan activists must take place under international surveillance. Freedom, including to practice one's religion, is a universal human right and is not subject to negotiation. We cannot remain silent when Beijing is trying to destroy the national religious identity of Tibet.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ogolu.
Sehr geehrte Frau Vizepräsidentin, sehr geehrter Herr Kommissar, wir sind
President, Commissioner, we are deeply affected by the death of the Tibetan spiritual figure Tulku Hunkar Dorje. It cannot be the case that, according to reports, his corpse was cremated without the agreement of his family. Commissioner, you know how important religious freedom is. You come from a member state where it is a matter of intense debate. The state cannot take an individual's freedom away. So I would ask the Commissioner and the whole Commission to recognise that a peaceful Buddhist religion is destroyed. So this is a message that we cannot allow. Please take that message with you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nanisto, please.
Madam President, China's crackdown on religious minorities is intensifying. Under Xi Jinping, Tibetan Buddhists and Uyghurs face forced assimilation, surveillance and brutal repression. This is state-sponsored cultural erasure. Religious freedom in China is among the worst globally, and Tibet is in this sense under siege. Children are forced into boarding under siege. Children are forced into boarding schools to erase their identity, and religious leaders are imprisoned, and some, like now Humka Donia Rinpoche, die in custody under murky circumstances. This isn't just a domestic issue, it's an EU concern. China's human rights abuses have strained EU-China relations, and the EU must act. We must suspend extradition treaties with the PRC to protect exiles and dissidents from persecution. We also must have sanctions, effective sanctions, against those officials and entities that are responsible for Tibet's repression, and we must demand an independent international inquiry on the circumstances of the death of Humka Donia Rinpoche. We cannot forget Tibet, and we must make sure that human rights are at the core of our relationship towards China.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you very much. Mr. McNamara, please.
Thank you very much, Vice President. As we stand here at this moment, we're celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations with China. In that time, much has been achieved by the European Union. There have been enormous developments. There's also been enormous developments in China, which must be commended. However, differences also remain, and while it would be wrong not to acknowledge the developments that have taken place in China, huge advances particularly in technology and in AI, equally it would be wrong not to acknowledge the differences. However, just because there are differences doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in dialogue, that we shouldn't seek to persuade each other of each other's positions. Freedom of religion is a central tenet of Western belief, of Western civilization. We believe that religious groups should be autonomous in how they organise themselves. That is not the experience of Buddhists in Tibet, nor is it the experience of Muslim groups in China, be it Uyghurs or Hui Muslims, or indeed of Roman Catholics, where 2 bishops have been appointed, notwithstanding the fact that the Apostolic See is now vacant. However, it's more than a central tenet of Western belief. It's also a commitment that China entered into when it signed the ICCPR, and it's one that I think we can legitimately ask that they honour for the sake of adherence to various religions across China. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you very much. The debate will conclude with Catch the Sky. Mr. Andrew-Kaitis, please.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, in Lithuania, when the Supreme Council of Lithuania proclaimed its documents on March the 11th, we listened to the words of Dalai Lama, who paid a visit to us. Accepting Dalai Lama in the Lithuanian parliament was a very complicated issue. He ran the risk with everything. This time we can once again state that Lithuania feels deeply indebted to Tibet, and we honor it very much. And today, when we talk about restrictions to religious freedoms, we, representatives of the democratic Lithuania in the European Parliament, express solidarity to Tibet's people and their religious leaders, and we invite to contribute to this resolution.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Vice President, honourable members. Thank you for your contributions to this debate. I do not need to remind you about the EU's persistent and grave concerns on the very serious human rights situation in China. The Chinese authorities in China's Tibetan areas continue to severely and systematically restrict the exercise of fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of religion or belief. Buddhist monks are held captive as political detainees or sentenced to re-education or prison. There are reports about the demolition of Buddhist monasteries. The implementation of regulations by the government of China are affecting and interfering with Tibetan Buddhism, including the succession and recognition of lamas and living Buddhas continues. We continue to urge the Chinese government not to interfere in succession processes, including in the succession process of the Dalai Lama. Soon, on the 17th of May, we will mark the sad 30th anniversary of the enforced disappearance of the 11th Panchen Lama, the second most important spiritual figure in Tibetan Buddhism, whose whereabouts are unknown. The recent and suspicious death of prominent Tibetan Buddhist leader Tulku Hunkar Dorje in Vietnam is another source of concern on which further clarity should be sought through an independent investigation. Against this background, the EU will continue to reiterate the rights of individuals or religious communities to conduct their basic affairs and freely choose their religious leaders without government interference, whether in Tibet or elsewhere in the world. The EU follows Tibet's ongoing human rights crisis very closely. My colleagues have kept the Subcommittee on Human Rights informed of our action. The Commission fully shares the concerns of this House, like-minded governments, the UN and academic experts and civil society in this area. As in the past, I can also assure you that the EU will continue to speak out against human rights violations occurring across China, including in Tibet. We will also continue to convey our concerns to the Chinese leadership, including at the highest political level during EU-China summits and other high-level meetings, in addition to the EU-China human rights dialogue. Thank you.
Grazie, Commissario. Thank you, Commissioner.
In motion for a resolution tabled by 5 groups on the violations of religious freedom in Tibet. Amendment 1 by roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Rejected. I give the floor to Mr. Terch to move an oral amendment, adding a new paragraph after paragraph 7.
Thank you, Mr. President. It would be as follows. Is deeply concerned about the increasing levels of attacks, coercion, discrimination, harassment, violence and repression against religious freedom as a global phenomenon under the CCP rule in Tibet. In particular, condemns this in the strongest possible terms the persecution against Christians, the most persecuted religious group in the world.
Is there any opposition to the oral amendment? Then the oral amendment cannot be taken. We move to the next vote, the vote of the resolution as a whole by roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Adopted.